Right, it's 8:02, so I think we should begin. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. We are sharing findings and typologies today, which are drawn from the illegal wildlife trade, from case reviews that we, RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, have conducted in East and Southern Africa with partners, which you'll hear more about later. My name is Anne-Marie Whedon. I'm the Senior Research Fellow in RUSI's Organised Crime and Policing team in charge of the Environmental Crime Portfolio. My background is multidisciplinary, but my technical expertise is in combating wildlife crime and related economic crime and corruption. I've spent 12 years in Uganda before moving back to the UK in 2020. I've been involved in multiple illegal wildlife trade interventions, including capacity building programs and research for enforcement and criminal justice, as well as supporting investigations into transnational organized crime groups involved in the offending. This webinar aims to support both public and private sector stakeholders, including NGOs and civil society, in their work to counter wildlife trafficking and wildlife-related illicit financial flows. It's part of a wider project called Case Closed, using historic cases to enable new financial investigations, which is funded by the UK government through the Illegal Wildlife Trade Challenge Fund. Right now, I just need to cover off a few housekeeping notes and announcements, and then we can get underway with our first speaker, who is me. So the introduction will be short and sweet. The workshop is recorded and we will be sharing it publicly, but our Q&A session at the end is off the record. So that can be a more candid discussion if you so wish. It's 2 hours long, so we will hear from 5 speakers before a short Q&A at the end. If you've got a question for one of our speakers, please put it in the Q&A function as we go along. It's my role to triage those questions, and then we have them posed to our speakers by my colleague Neil at the end. And only the host and panelists will be able to see the Q&A. So don't worry, once you put it in there, it will be in there, but we'll be able to review it behind the scenes as we go through the webinar presentations. But it does help to get it answered if it's in there nice and early on. Towards the end of the workshop, there will also be a short exit poll. Zavile, my colleague in the events team, will put that up. It will pop up on your screens, and I would really appreciate it if you could very quickly fill that in. It will only take 30 seconds of your time, and you should be able to do it as we segue into the Q&A session. The Case Closed project also sees the release of our latest Whitehall report on the RUSI website. That will be published in about an hour's time, and hopefully I'll be able to pop the link to that report in the chat before the end of the workshop. However, if not, you'll be able to find it on the RUSI website later on today. So it's all about how to use case reviews to improve financial investigation skills and capacity, as well as identifying new financial intelligence. So it's a best practice guide, essentially. So if there are any NGOs or private sector institutions out there that are working in collaboration with government agencies and trying to replicate this sort of activity, hopefully you'll find it useful. Now, I'm going to do a short landscape setting presentation. So if you'll bear with me while I try and multitask and get the right presentation up and on the right slide. So hopefully you can all see my screen. So essentially, we are the Royal United Services Institute for Defence and Security Studies. We're the world's oldest and UK's leading defence and security think tank. We publish independent evidence-based research and conduct events and engagement activities on national and international matters of defence and security, which these days, as we all know, very much includes threats like environmental crime and climate change. So it's all, you know, our overarching ambition is to build a safer, more secure world. And I don't think any of us here today would disagree that that's possible without a healthy ecosystem and protected wildlife. We are part of a group called Organised Crime and Policing, and together with the Centre for Financial Crime and Security Studies, another research group within RUSI, we've done a lot of work since 2016 on environmental crime and the illicit financial dimensions of the different offending typologies, including the illegal wildlife trade. So why should we care about the illegal wildlife trade? I'm going to cover this really quickly because I think you're all here today because you care about IWT. But we know that it affects thousands of species worldwide, and that has links to the acceleration of species extinction, environmental degradation, damage to ecosystem services, and climate change acceleration. IWT itself, as the trade, is estimated to be valued somewhere between 7 to 23 billion a year. It's very difficult, as we know, to put a price on a clandestine activity. So that is a very broad range of estimation, and it's likely to have increased substantially since that estimate was provided in 2016 by UNEP. However, when you look at the overall damage caused by IWT to ecosystem services, like the fuel we rely on, the air that we breathe, the water that we rely on, and so on, that actually deprives countries of far more in terms of lost revenues and billions of dollars of damage. So it's estimated, a World Bank report in 2019 calculated that IWT caused around $1 trillion of damage to ecosystem services. And it also contributes to the growth of illicit financial flows, which is why we're all here today. And as we know, those are linked to corruption and organized crime. Now, one of the things that we come across in economic crime is this sort of reaction that, well, it's only money. You know, what does it matter in a global financial system or your national financial system if it's dirty money or clean money? Money makes the world go round, right? So why should we actually care about the financial aspect of IWT? Well, there are multiple different types of financial crime, corruption, bribery, and patronage being part of it. And, you know, the money laundering aspect of organized crime, illicit commodity-based crime will drive higher rates of corruption in the jurisdictions it happens. The money laundering of the proceeds goes through the bank systems and ends up in the financial system. That has links to, you know, terrorism finance, and organized crime groups will thrive from the profits that they make and are able to exchange. And that in turn allows those groups to converge and conflate. And what you get is this phenomenon of convergence, which first starts with the roots and the supply chains. So if you are moving illicit product A from country 1 to country 2, and there's an opportunity to either move alongside it or in the empty leg on the return to actually add another illicit commodity, then you get this growth of supply chain crime as service. And then moving into a different kind of convergence, you see also the conflation of different actors and polycriminality amongst the organized crime groups. So you get this flourishing, this mushrooming that happens, and this creation of what we call criminogenic environments, which ultimately leads to the thriving growth of organized crime and in turn kleptocracies as well, because as we well know, organized crime groups will move forward hand in hand with corrupt officials, and that fuels the growth of kleptocratic systems and governments. So before we hand over to our guest speakers, I wanted to just cover a couple of definitions. Financial crime is often referred to as economic crime. Those terms are more or less interchangeable, and it includes illegal acts committed by any individual or group for economic gain. It's all about the profit. That definition's from Europol, but there are others that exist out there which are similar. In the context of wildlife crime, economic crime includes very diverse typologies. We've got money laundering, which is obviously what people are doing with the profits of the crime. That is then converted into criminal assets. There's tax evasion that occurs as well, and often, you know, you will see IWT cases in different jurisdictions being prosecuted under the Customs Act. There's document and permit fraud with the misuse or forgery of CITES permits, and the laundering of illegal wildlife into the legal trade. Then there's corruption which we've already mentioned, bribery, patronage, abuse of position. There are many different forms of corruption, and terrorism finance. So obviously that is the way that certain terrorist groups rather, and insurgent groups will use illicit activities to fund their terrorism activities. In terms of the governance landscape, there are actors at the national level and the regional and the international level. And most of you will be familiar with the Financial Action Task Force. They're the global standard setting body. You'll hear them referenced in a few presentations today. They also have observer organizations that are part of that unit, which include the World Bank, IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and the United Nations. At a regional level, there are these FATF-style regional bodies, FSRBs, as they're known, including the East and Southern African Anti-Money Laundering Group, SMLAG, MENA FATF in Middle East and North Africa, JABA in West Africa, and GABAC in Central Africa, and so on. I've only been looking at the African ones here, so apologies to anybody who is from outside of the continent, but our project has been focused on 4 key African jurisdictions. At a national level, the landscape is very much embedded in the governance structures of the local government. There is a National Financial Intelligence Unit, sometimes called an FIA or an FIC, but generically referred to as an FIU. You've also got the central bank that's heavily involved in the regulation of supervised financial institutions like commercial banks or microfinance or mobile money organizations. And then you've also got specialist units within the Public Prosecution Authority for asset recovery. You've got anti-corruption bodies, inspector generals, interagency task forces, and so on. And obviously, when it comes to specific predicate offences, you've got the Wildlife Management Authority as well. Key actor missing from that slide, however, is the private sector. And it really is, sorry, I have to just minimize my view. It really is a key player in the governance landscape for anti-money laundering regimes around the world. The national FIUs and the central banks will supervise what they call reporting entities in the private sector. And these types of entities vary from country to country depending on their own national risk assessments, but they typically include commercial banks, other financial institutions, credit institutions, development banks, foreign exchange bureaus, money remittance services, and so on. They also will include designated non-financial businesses and professions, which include different types of different categories like casinos and real estate and dealers in precious metals, lawyers and accountants, and so on. These types of companies are considered high risk, usually, to money laundering risks in certain sectors. These sectors are also obliged to then follow certain regulations and will be penalized if they do not do so. So there is a very big industry and concern around compliance. And for the benefit of public sector attendees today who perhaps are not so familiar with the systems inside the banks and so on, these can include things like customer due diligence, enhanced due diligence for certain high-risk entities or customers, suspicious transaction reporting, the monitoring and detection and reporting up to the national FIUs of any transaction which stands out as suspicious against certain parameters. And, you know, obviously other types of reporting like large cash transactions and so on. And, you know, the point of this is that, you know, the private sector, you guys are sitting on a wealth of data and you have your own responsibilities in terms of monitoring that data and reporting it when it's suspicious. And if we can find a way to improve the pathways and the communication and the information sharing between the public and the private sector, then we believe the private sector can really be harnessed to play a significant role in combating IWT. And indeed, in many countries, is already doing so. And we will hear a bit more about that later. So the point is that collaboration helps complete the intelligence picture. So any individual reporting entity will have only a small picture of an organized crime network. The picture on the left there is what you might see as a government agency. It's maybe perhaps what the police see or what the Wildlife Authority looking into a certain network might see. And then when you put that together with all the data that's out there from private sector and so on, you've got an incredible, enriched, much more comprehensive view. A final word then before I hand over to our next speaker. What is financial intelligence? We talk a lot about financial intelligence throughout. And I think there is this preconception amongst many practitioners, investigators and prosecutors, that financial intelligence has to be financial documents like bank statements and so on. It is bank statements and deposit slips and transfer forms and EFTs and credit card records and all the rest. But it is also something as simple as a phone number. Mobile money records, Western Union records, these can all be obtained from one single phone number. You don't need a name, you just need a phone number. So, let's go back to basics and understand that, getting hold of suspects' phones, looking at the phone forensics, we can be very sophisticated with the analytics and intelligence that can be obtained from phones, but we can also start with the very basics and just have a number. Within the phone forensics, you might find digital wallet info. You might get just pictures of notes and budgets. You'll see that image on the slide is a picture from a suspect's phone, whereby clearly large amounts of money were being tallied up over a certain period of time. And you can just see the name of the jurisdiction in the top right. So you can see how it can help investigators put together, and intelligence analysts put together a bigger picture of the networks and really understand those networks. Then you've got the trade documents like bills of lading and CITES permits that are involved in export pathways of product consignments. You've got company information, company documents, directors' information and shareholding data. You've got receipts and invoices. Something as simple as a utility bill can lead you to the suspect and help identify what assets, what properties he or she owns. And then you've got, the subject of today's webinar, which is, using case reviews. So there is a wealth of case data now as organizations around the world have been more active in combating IWT. And all of that, not all of that, but most of that rests on the predicate offense investigation. And so there are often situations where you'll look at a historic case and you'll find that there are unexplored financial leads that were not explored at the time because perhaps the money laundering legislation was not in place yet, or the capacity was not there. We're now getting to a situation where people are aware of the importance of financial investigation. So there is this wonderful opportunity to go back and look at cold cases or closed cases and conduct a review, which can generate fresh financial intelligence. So I'd like to thank you for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And I'm sorry, this has been the Anne-Marie show so far, and that's certainly not our intent. So I would like to introduce now our next speaker, who is my colleague, Mark Williams. He's the program manager with the Organised Crime and Policing team and works across a range of RUSI programs, including wildlife and other forms of transnational organised crime. He also works on maritime security and climate change threats and has a legal background. So over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. I hope everyone can see my screen. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who's joined today and those who joined yesterday as well. 2 days in a row is quite a big ask, so we're very grateful for you giving us as much time as you have so far. Anne-Marie very kindly introduced RUSI and to a lesser degree the team that we sit under, which is the Organised Crime and Policing team. So I will skip over as much as I can some of the housekeeping stuff and narrow in on the juicier content as we go along. So in terms of previous RUSI work, I think the place to start for this particular session is to define where we began when looking at the financial dimensions of illegal wildlife trade, and specifically one set of projects conducting closed case reviews. I'll come on to what these are briefly. However, the point to recognize is that the FATF, the Financial Accident Task Force, have endorsed RUSI and others' use of these reviews to identify and uncover some of the more nebulous dimensions of illicit finance driving illegal wildlife trade across the world. In 2016, RUSI conducted a closed case review in Laos, People's Democratic Republic, and that marked the first time RUSI had mobilized this particular method in the wildlife context. The use of closed cases is not novel in criminal activity writ large. However, in the wildlife domain, this is the first time that I think globally there's started to be a common practice in terms of using this method to try and work out where money is going, who is moving it, and how. And it is against that backdrop that RUSI embarked on the current project that has brought all of us here today. We've termed this project Case Closed, using historic cases to enable new financial investigations. And it's supported by the UK's Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, also known as DEFRA. The current project, in sum, is a 2-year effort that hopes to help reduce illegal wildlife trade and, as a result, alleviate some poverty drivers, specifically in Malawi, Namibia, Uganda, and Zambia. Among other things, that has primarily involved the delivery of targeted multi-agency capacity building through closed case review workshops led by my colleague Neil Bennett, who's also on this call and who you'll hear from in a little while. Over the past 18 months or so, a RUSI team has conducted capacity building in those 4 countries to nearly 90 participants from different sectors, and crucially from both the private and public sector, which is really the spirit of this particular presentation. The workshops led to significant learnings as to how the method works, how the method can be improved in the future, where it has particular value. But of a special relevance to this presentation is that it helped us identify some emerging financial typologies of criminal activity in the illegal wildlife domain. These typologies and other emerging insights as to how illegal wildlife trade is being conducted, how those patterns evolve, is the bedrock for how the financial sector can help the public sector to develop financial intelligence and ultimately support financial investigations. The project is not without its limitations, and nor is the case closed method. It is difficult to review closed cases because they're sensitive, and we were very careful to ensure that everything that we were dealing with was truly closed, not just in a legal context, but in terms of the practical risks associated with looking at information on real people in the target countries. That being said, there are a couple of lessons that were brought out from these workshops that we'd like to present to you in case this method was to be utilized in the future. The first is around adaptability. One of the things we were very grateful for was the fact that the method was applicable in all focal countries, regardless of the different baselines and capacity, even where there were differing baselines of capacity within agencies in the same country. We found that everyone was able to benefit from looking at missed opportunities to conduct financial investigations, but specifically to gather financial intelligence. And this was basically predicated on national buy-in. And we're very grateful to our local partners for helping us to build trust with you and for all of you in the focal countries who were kind enough to donate your trust to us. The method only works with national buy-in, and the endorsement of the case review process has to come from the top. So we were fortunate to have, again, buy-in from key agencies and actors, some of whom will be presenting today. And it's only through their collaboration that we were able to glean anything at all from these projects and this workshop. The foundational point, and the thing that I'd like to drive home today, is that the multi-agency approach is crucial and necessary if anybody is going to look at closed cases at all. This even involves including agencies and institutions that wouldn't traditionally be involved in these types of capacity building activity, namely, for our purposes, the judiciary. While the judicial actors are not typically participants in multi-agency law enforcement training, we would like to advocate for their inclusion in case reviews. Whether that is the entire sessions or particular sessions, it provides really useful insights for law enforcement actors as to how evidence should be presented in court, the admissibility of evidence, but also helps judicial actors to upskill their own understanding of the significance of illegal wildlife trade, particularly its financial drivers. And today, that brings us to the role of the private sector. The private sector contains and holds vast swathes of information that could be useful to the public sector in investigating wildlife crimes. However, this information is often concealed due to a lack of knowledge around how illegal wildlife trade takes place. So what we're going to push for today and walk through is a couple of examples as to how gathering this information can be easier than people think, and institutionalized so it can be done routinely. The final point that was useful to point out is that national FIUs and their roles are not always clearly understood, even if they're codified within the relevant institutional documentation. We found that across the focal countries, there was often some debate as to where the FIU's role should begin and end. And it's important that that is clarified, excuse me, at the start of every workshop to ensure that people understand their roles and responsibilities as clearly as possible. Out of these workshops, we were able to pull a series of financial typologies and some risk indicators as to what illegal wildlife trade looks like, not just in these focal countries, but in sub-Saharan Africa writ large. These typologies or emerging methodologies are presented in a few slides that I will just show you now. And we've tried to select as many broad examples as we can to illustrate the breadth of this crime type, but also how easy it can be to pick out insights that would help particularly private sector financial institutions to identify and flag risky activity. The first typology, and this is not novel, that was identified was the use of casinos broadly to help obscure or to launder illicit proceeds of wildlife crimes. Casinos are used in other crime types, and everyone on this call will be familiar with them as a vulnerability and a risk point. However, particularly, and based on the Linzan investigation in Malawi, which you will hear more about later from one of our guest speakers, this particular casino was using high interest loans to its customers to help conceal the illegitimacy of income from the casino. This is a really easy thing to forward on to a private sector financial institution to say, if you see this casino issuing high interest loans to its customers, that is something to flag as potentially aligned to illegal wildlife trade. Casinos broadly are used by syndicates to launder proceeds of crime, but a closer look at how they're doing it would make it much easier for financial institutions to identify particular things that look a bit suspicious. Another cross-cutting and not novel typology that was evident across almost all the focal countries was the often ignored role of wives and girlfriends. Regionally and globally, heterosexual norms and assumptions around the role of women in criminal activity mean that we simply don't look at wives and girlfriends of criminal offenders or suspected offenders as much as we should. Throughout these workshops, we identified prominent persons of interest in Uganda, Malawi, and Tanzania, most of whom are well known in popular media. We also identified other senior actors, often of Eastern Asian descent, and senior female actors, I should say, who are driving and in some cases sitting at the top of complex and dynamic organized crime networks driving wildlife crime throughout sub-Saharan Africa. These are not always women of East Asian descent. There is a famous example of Mama Congo in Zambia that is worth looking at. But the point here is to drive home that women may be both victims and perpetrators of wildlife crime and require investigation as anybody else does. Particularly, the financial dimensions of the crime often touch wives and girlfriends. There's a case in Nigeria that shows traffickers using their wives' and girlfriends' bank accounts specifically to send and receive illicit funds. And this kind of activity is done with the knowledge that they are less likely to be investigated. Again, and I will repeat this a few times, so forgive me, it would not be very difficult to identify these people and to start looking for that information. What we need to do is institutionalize looking at women in general as a process, rather than ad hoc when we have particular suspicions related to individuals. We also encountered several typologies of criminal activity related to the concealment of illegal wildlife trade products. And in particular, an emerging practice that is suspected based on intelligence around the use and transit of chili peppers. Seizures from 2017 and 2019, particularly in Cameroon, suggested an abnormal amount of chili peppers were being moved in and through the country and broadly towards West Africa within the sub-Saharan Africa region. It is suspected that these consignments are being used to conceal things that are much more difficult for sniffer dogs to detect due to the prominent aromas of chili peppers themselves. These actors have been linked to known wildlife traffickers, including Mwazukroma, who's well known to most of you on this call, and Gakufodi networks, the Gakufodi network, again, which is probably quite well known to some of you, although not as much as the Mwazukroma case. It's worth flagging that no evidence directly links chili exports from Africa to Asia with wildlife trafficking. However, the increase in the volume of this transit activity is an indicator that something has changed, whether that's criminal or otherwise. Stepping back from the chili peppers themselves, the use of specific products to conceal IWT products is a common methodology. And what private sector financial institutions need to understand or to know, and this is where public sector comes in, is where these trends are changing, when they change, and what to be looking for, in which geographies and which locations. The use of mobile money to facilitate shipments, both in illegal wildlife trade and other crime types, again, is not novel. However, there are questions as to how we institutionalize analyzing this activity. During the Uganda workshop and prior to the case review exercise, one of our RUSI experts conducted a temporal analysis of phone records, mobile money transactions, and key shipping events. Again, this is not maths heavy, this is not difficult, but simply looking at the timeline of mobile money payments helps to paint a clearer picture of where the money might have moved. This is not done routinely, and not just in Africa, but generally. But just as part of this workshop, the case file analysis presented an opportunity for people to do it in a controlled environment. And if we can do it in a workshop, there's no reason why this can't become normal practice. We also identified typologies related to the movement of specific products themselves. This example from Namibia relates to the movement of succulent plants, which have become increasingly popular due to social media trends, particularly on Instagram and TikTok. These types of plants, specifically lithops and a few others pictured below, are located in the south and southwest of Namibia in coastal regions. And generally speaking, Namibian authorities are identifying that South African poachers are traversing these borders to poach these products and take them back across the border to South Africa and sometimes further on to Angola. They are concealed and incongruous shipping, a bit like the chili pepper typology, and in clear violation of Namibian protection laws, as well as other countries' laws across those borders. This sort of activity is something that the financial sector simply will not see if they are not pointed in the right direction. It is very difficult for a private sector financial institution to know that this activity is suspicious if they're not aware of the products being moved at all, or the specific localities in which these products grow. Again, it wouldn't take much to provide this information. Once provided, it would make it much easier for people to identify funny transactions within that locality of atypical volumes. The next group of typologies relate to submersive activity around court process. So across all focal countries, we identified suspicious shadowy payment of penalties. Most of the jurisdictions subject to this project have very penal wildlife laws, making it easy to punish low-level offenders with harsh sentences. However, the fees required to pay bail or to settle these sentences are a business cost for organized criminal networks. So there's greater need to investigate who is paying bail for low-level offenders and how often this is taking place. Again, this is simple or simply analyzed with better cross-sectional information sharing between banks, public sector, FIUs, and other law enforcement agencies. Similarly, and tied to that point, flashy defense lawyers or defense lawyers on retainers for low-level offenders are also an indicator of some suspicious activity. If people from poor and rural backgrounds are able to recruit some of the top lawyers in the country, this should be an indicator that something is probably not as normal as it should be. There's also use of consistent lawyers, or lawyers being used consistently for the series of offenders, which should point to suspicious activity, as well as if we know particular geographies are related to illegal wildlife trade, that we can profile some of the people paying these lawyers and start investigating them for their suspicious activity. And finally, the use of plea bargaining was again present in several countries. Specific examples presented on screen come from Uganda, but were seen across other focal workshops. Plea bargains are an easy way for people to settle ongoing cases and subvert further investigation. Better understanding is required as to how easy it is for a plea bargain to be used to obscure the wider workings of an organized criminal network. And again, plea bargain payments can be identified within the financial system and are indicators that, again, something might have gone right. I think I'm about 1 minute over, so forgive me. But the key points that we'd like to drive home are, one, that it doesn't require much data to support financial institutions to help them understand what might look like suspicious activity. My colleague Henry Schomper mentioned yesterday that financial intelligence, financial investigations are not maths heavy. It is fairly easy for public sector experts who know the typologies of these criminal activities to share that information with the private sector and help better identify risk on a more routine basis. And finally, the consistent communication of these typologies is fundamental. It cannot be ad hoc. Organized crime groups are constantly adapting, constantly changing their methodologies, constantly changing the products they're moving. And again, if the private sector is not kept in the loop routinely, it is nearly impossible for them to identify suspicious activity and to communicate that to the relevant jurisdictions. Thank you for giving me 16 minutes and 45 seconds. I'm very grateful for your time. We have much more interesting speakers coming up who are going to talk about specific examples, but I'm happy to take questions at the end of this session. Thank you all.
I think Mark is being self-deprecating as normal. That was really interesting, Mark. Thank you. My next speaker is Her Worship Gladys Kamasanyu. Privileged to have her join us on this call. She is the Chief Magistrate at the Wildlife Crime Court in Uganda and is coming to us live from the court itself. It's the first court of its kind in Africa and launched in 2017. Gladys was fundamentally part of the development of the court and has a lot of knowledge about animal law, having achieved a master's in animal law, and has also founded an NGO called Help African Animals. She will talk to us now briefly about the role of the courts in asset forfeiture. Over to you, Gladys.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Good morning. I hope it's morning for all of us. Good morning, everyone, and I'm happy to be here this morning. I don't know if you can see me, Anne-Marie. No?
I can. You're fine.
Okay. So I will be, like Anne-Marie has said, be taking us through the role of courts in the fight against IWT, and specifically talking about how courts can be used to go for those proceeds of illegal wildlife trade and make it undesirable. So I have a brief outline. Some of what I was going to go through, Anne-Marie has already covered it, and I'm sorry for coming late to the meeting. It's all because I had a session that I couldn't avoid handling. So anyhow, happy to be here. Yeah, so I'll be looking at the role of courts, the loan forfeiture briefly, some of the opportunities of adjudicating IW cases with an eye on financial dimensions, some of the challenges that we encounter, some approaches, and make a conclusion. So the judiciary, not just the judiciary of Uganda, but all judiciaries in the world have a role to play in combating IWT. It's all because judiciaries or courts help in enforcement of wildlife laws. They protect the environment and actually participate in combating IWT. Courts ensure that those who are suspected to have committed IWT cases, which we're talking about today, receive fair trials. Actually, they do expect fair trials and are entitled to fair trials. Courts determine their guilt or innocence, and then they go ahead to impose punishments suiting the crimes that they will have committed. And therefore, the goal is for courts to protect community from criminality. And therefore, courts can be used to take proceeds of IWT from perpetrators. Court can be used to not only concentrate on the unlawful possessions, how much has been seized, it has come to court, it's a wrongdoing anyway, just hear the case, impose a penalty, and the person goes in, goes out, and they still enjoy their proceeds of crime. So in Uganda, we have had some progress in adjudication of IWT cases, where in 2017, like Anne-Marie said, we took a very bold step of establishing the Uganda Wildlife Court, where now we are happy to have wildlife cases adjudicated in one court in the country, where they all make their way, and we are able to specialize to expeditiously handle them, to make sure that the costs involved in adjudicating them do not outweigh the benefits that would accrue from such prosecutions. And yes, and something else we have had in the recent time was the enactment of the Uganda Wildlife Act of 2019, which happens to be one of the maybe the best laws on wildlife on the continent, which now introduces a penalty of up to life imprisonment. And so far, one sentence of imprisonment for life has been imposed to a repeat offender who was trading in elephant ivory. So since we started, we have had over 2,000 cases adjudicated here at the court successfully. Forfeiture, I know that many countries could have, laws on forfeiture. Then for us in our Wildlife Act, we have a provision on forfeiture, which actually allows court, after convicting an offender with an IWT case, going ahead to order for forfeiture of proceeds of the crime of IWT that they maybe have been engaged in, and forfeit the proceeds that they have been getting from the illegal wildlife trade, forfeit them to the state and have them go back to the same economy where they actually are supposed to go. So, however, the law requires that this is done by the prosecution in form of, adducing evidence. That means during trial, the prosecution must do a great job of adducing such evidence of especially the wealth of the accused person, so that court keeps in the know of what this person has. And then, of course, proper investigations must have been done to be able to establish that actually the riches, the property that we are talking about here was realized from nothing else, but because of trade in IWT, you've been able to adduce evidence to show that this person has been engaging in it, and you're able to prove that before a court. And court, if convinced that what has been put before it is actually nothing but proceeds of the crime, court may order that such property be forfeited, or if it's money, be forfeited. If it is property, it is sold, and its proceeds actually are forfeited to the states. So the opportunities which are involved in adjudicating wildlife cases in courts with financial dimension is that putting people in prisons for whatever period of time, or if we make them pay fines, that alone is only part of the solution to the problem of IWT. Why? If someone goes in prison, serves their penalty, serves their term of imprisonment, they will still come out. When they come out, they will still find the riches that they had accrued over the years, they had gained from illegal wildlife trade. They will still enjoy their lives. If they're ordered to pay for fines, they will go and take a small portion from the very wealth, the proceeds of the crime, take a very small portion, pay to the state, and they go out, still continue to enjoy their comfortable lives. So it means we have to do whatever it takes to take away the wealth that has been accumulated by perpetrators of IWT, to cripple them and make the illegal business risky, so they don't want to risk again to go back, and make it undesirable for them to want to go back to deal in it. It means that when we have a financial dimension as we are prosecuting wildlife IWT cases, we will stop perpetrators of crimes from profiting. The profit, which is the key driver for their involvement in the illegal wildlife trade, we will be taking it away and not enable them continue to profit from the IWT. And we will put back such profits to the economy from where it was actually stolen. These resources belong to our people, the poor people of those countries where we are working. So that at least the proceeds that were gained illegally should go back to the same economy. And then when we do that, we are also reducing the insecurity. We know that IWT, excuse me, has ceased to be a mere maybe conservation issue in countries where it is taking place, but it is an insecurity to the whole world. We know what is involved. All these resources are taken, the proceeds are used to destabilize countries, and many countries have actually have tested some of this insecurity, Uganda being one of them. Today, it is believed that Konyi uses actually resources from IWT, from wildlife, trade, wildlife, resource, excuse me, to exchange them for firearms. And he's now wherever he is it is believed because of illegal wildlife trade. Proceeds, some of these, the expensive houses, cars, there's so much money, and we can only discover these when we do financial investigations. So the challenge is that where we don't have financial investigations done and evidence is brought before a court, courts cannot order for forfeiture. Yeah, that means that no property will be attached. Someone will go in, serve their sentences, come out and enjoy their lives. They don't feel a pinch. They don't feel punished because anyway, they are back and using their money. They have their expensive cars, their expensive houses. Nothing changes at all. So financial investigations, unfortunately, are usually not done. Usually by the time courts pronounce themselves in cases, there are no financial investigations put before them. Where I work, we have had claims sometimes in a few cases that, oh, we were still doing this investigation, we were still looking for the information about this and that, but now the case has come to an end. And yet the law says, upon conviction, as court is sentencing somebody, they should adduce evidence of the proceeds of the crime, and court may order that those proceeds are forfeited. Now, question is, court has already washed their hands. They have sentenced somebody. They are maybe serving a penalty, or they've
one minute,
paid the fine and gone.
I'm sorry to interrupt. 1 minute.
Okay. Do they bring them back to court, which is not possible because at that point, courts are functus official. So we should seize the moment and always try to do financial investigations at the earliest opportunity that we have. Then we interest ourselves in the kingpins, those kingpins, the actual people that actually have financial information, because the poor ones that are always in the court system do not have any financial information to inquire about. Yeah, so we should ensure that the kingpins are not left outside to use the same proceeds to come and be able to have the small perpetrators released on bail, on police bond, and to interfere with inquiries in cases, to help pay fines and even get acquittals for them. And also to stop them from continuing to use the rural people using the same proceeds of crime. Because if we are arresting the rural people, the poor people, then it means other poor people who will be out there can be co-opted by kingpins to be used. So what do we do? Let's go deeper in our investigations, not do business as usual. Each case should be given its priority, handle it differently from another, make sense out of what is actually appearing to not have sense. By doing that, we will be able to go further and perhaps get where we want to get, but also noting that judicial officers can only make decisions basing on what has been presented before them. There is no guesswork, no miracle, but what has been presented before them. So I will stop here just by noting that we have one earth where we all belong, we live. It is a co-shared earth, meaning that we live there, not us alone as humans, but also the non-human animals that we have a duty to conserve, not for themselves alone to be happy, but for our own future as humans. Thank you. The time was so little.
Thank you so much. We know you're super busy, so thank you so much for sparing the time today. It's now my pleasure to introduce Margaret Chitundu, who we're sticking with the theme of law at the moment, who is the head of asset forfeiture in the National Prosecution Authority for Zambia. In her role at the MPA, she's also instrumental in the recently formed National Task Force on Asset Recovery, which is an interagency framework helping to various government agencies work together to combat money laundering, including related to illegal wildlife trade. So over to you, Margaret. I'm just going to share your screen. Share your presentation, Margaret. I do apologize. Hoping you can see that, Margaret. Can you turn your mic on? I think we're struggling to hear you, Margaret. Margaret, perhaps you can WhatsApp me, and while we sort that out, we'll go to the next presenter, who is John Minofu. John, are you there?
Yes, I'm there. And
excellent. Are you ready to go in Margaret's place? I'm sorry to spring it on you.
Yeah, can I go ahead?
Yes, you can go ahead. Do you want me to share your presentation?
No, I'll share myself.
You'll share yourself. Excellent. Go for it. Sorry, before you do, let me introduce you properly. John Minofu is the Director of Monitoring Analysis from the Financial Intelligence Authority in Malawi. He's got over a decade of experience working with the FIA, but was also previously with the Anti-Corruption Bureau. So his experience spans those different sectors. And he supports private and public sectors in Malawi in detecting and enforcing financial crime, as well as contributing to policy at an international level. He's going to be sharing with us today a very important case study from a landmark ruling in Malawi on money laundering. So over to you, John, and we will look forward to hearing more about the Linzang network.
Good morning, everyone. And I hope you're able to hear me. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thanks a lot. As already introduced, I'm John Minofu. I will share with you one presentation on money laundering convictions on IWT in Malawi, lessons from the Linzang case. And I hope most of the people on this workshop have already learned about this case. It's there on the open source. So the structure of the presentation is that I'll provide the historical IWT landscape in Malawi, the overview of the Linzang network, key actors, investigations, arrests, prosecutions, outcomes, and convictions. Then I also provide the money laundering typologies in Malawi and challenges. So in terms of the historical IWT landscape in Malawi, I'll just present to you where we were. So as Malawi, we were identified as the Southern African principal hub for wildlife traffickers. And we were more of a transit point. So we had the wildlife intercepted in the various countries across in the East Asia or in other countries, which were meant to have originated from Malawi. So this was a great concern to us as a country because we were looked at as a soft target for organized criminal syndicates. So we had weak borders and laws. And when we looked at ourselves, we had low interceptions and conviction rates as far as wildlife crime was concerned. So as a country, as authorities, in 2014, we had to come together to put our efforts together as law enforcement. So there were some organizations or agencies which were took a remote role as far as combating wildlife crime is concerned in Malawi. So in 2014, heads of several institutions took an initiative to form what we call Interagency Committee on Combating Wildlife Crime. And this agency was formed, and it comprises of over 13 agencies. So it includes the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, the Revenue Authority, the Anti-Corruption Authority, the Financial Intelligence Authority, the Forestry Department, and many more other departments as well. So we made a commitment and we did an action plan towards changing our approach towards tackling wildlife crime. So one of the issues that we lobbied for was for the strengthening of the laws. And one of the laws that we targeted was the National Parks and Wildlife Act and successfully in 2017, this law was changed and it was strengthened, and there were stiffer penalties that were introduced, and the penalties went to as far as 30 years imprisonment. So, and lucky enough, we also had the Financial Crimes Act that was also passed in 2017. So this started a new era as far as combating wildlife is concerned in Malawi. So just to demonstrate is that we had the famous syndicate that we tackled, and this is the Rinjan syndicate. And in this syndicate, in the slide that I'm showing the principal or the kingpin, the family in the middle. So I'm showing Lin Hyunhua himself, Lin Huixin, the daughter, and Queen Jean, the wife of the kingpin. So before that, because of the weaker laws and also lack of coordination, such an investigation couldn't have taken place. But with the coordination, now we had changed our approach. A lot of agencies were involved. And the investigations towards the syndicate started. And on the left side of the slide, you see that there were some Chinese nationals that were also linked to the syndicate. And to the right, you see that we also have some Malawians who are employees for the kingpin. And we also have down there the suppliers of the wildlife specimens. These are Zambian nationals. And below there, we also have a key player in the syndicate who is Lin Haoyun, who is the son-in-law of the kingpin. He is married to the daughter, Lin Huixin. So investigations, arrests, and prosecution. So what changed? We started using multiple legislation, not just concentrating on a single piece of legislation. Prosecutors, investigators were advised and they were sensitized on using multiple legislation in the investigation and in prosecution as well. And we also used multi-agency approach. Several agencies were involved at the same time. And also awareness and tips. We went ahead to do more awareness in our airports and in various strategic areas, the borders, to bring awareness on the dangers of committing wildlife crime in Malawi, especially looking at the laws that had come in. So we also had to do several strategies like doing phone extraction to obtain digital evidence. And this worked a lot because it fed into the financial investigations that we were doing. We also had to do court monitoring initiatives. So all the prosecutions that were taking place, they were monitored in court. There were people who were monitoring each and every court case that was taking place. So every court sitting, we had people sitting there monitoring what was happening. We also introduced dogs detection unit. So we had the wildlife dogs at strategic points. So if you visit Malawi, you find that we have dogs in our airport. And also the media was heavily involved in bringing awareness on the cases that are taking place on the arrest. And we also had to intensify training and capacity building for officers, who particularly targeting those involved in investigation and prosecution of wildlife crime. So in terms of financial investigations, around 2019, so the Financial Intelligence Authority launched a financial investigation against Lin Yunhua, who is said to be the kingpin of the network that I just presented earlier. And there were several nationalities that were involved. And as such, a lot of agencies that were involved, like the police, the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, they submitted a lot of information, a lot of data to the FIA for analysis. And this was the data from their initial arrests and searches. So as FIA, we conducted analysis on the subjects involved, and in this we utilized several bank statements, and I recall that there were over 30 bank accounts that were targeted in the initial stages of the investigations. And this was being reduced as the analysis continued. So we use remittance records and information from other departments as well, like the land registry that keeps information on properties, utility and revenue authorities. All these information was utilized. So what were the findings? So the major findings were that Lin Yunhua and his family, as presented, had amassed unexplained wealth that was not commensurate with their legal businesses. And the records of several transactions between the accounts of Lin Yunhua, his daughter, and the workers did not make economic sense. So you would see a lot of cash deposits and withdrawals, which did not make a lot of sense during analysis. And the major finding was that we found that he registered a company that was called is called Mon International. So on registration, this company was declared to be involved in the manufacture of roofing sheets. But on the ground, there was nothing connected to roofing sheets that was really happening on the ground. So you do not see transactions that would make sense as far as for a company that is involved in the manufacture of roofing sheets. So the company was being used as a loan shark. What was happening is that Lin Yunhua's daughter was frequenting the casino, one of the casino in Lilongwe, in Malawi. And there, gamblers would get money from him at a loan. And the agreement was that they would be paying 30% interest. So these were genuine customers of the casino, well noted by the casino. and some were even involved in businesses. So on paying back, some of these people who got the loans, they were paying back through the company of the Lynn's daughter. And when the money showed up there, it seems legitimate money. But further investigation is the one that led us to establishing that the loans is the only business that they have done, is that they were paying back loans which they obtained when they were gambling at the casino. So it was typical a money laundering scheme. So the funds that were being loaned out were suspected proceeds from wildlife crime. And this time, you should note that the wife of Lin Yunhua was already in prison, and his son-in-law was already in prison for wildlife offenses. So on arrest, the daughter of Lin Yunhua was arrested, and on arrest, there were several items that were confiscated from him. There was a lot of cash that was confiscated during the arrest, and the vehicle that was being used. So in all, about $490,000 was laundered through this account and through the casino. And the further action is that we took action to do a preservation order on some of the assets, provided the cash, the vehicle. So who is Lin Huixin? Lin Huixin is the daughter of the Lin Yunhua, who is said to be the kingpin for wildlife syndicate, the Lin Jian syndicate. He is a girlfriend or fiancé, or is married to Lin Lihoyun, who is the son-in-law of Lin Yunhua. She is director of Mon International, and she laundered over $860,000 through the casino. And she was in charge of the Lin family. And when his parents were in jail, she was the one who was continuing the activities of the syndicate when her parents were in prison. So she would be given instruction and should pay even lawyers who were representing them. She was the one who was operating the syndicate. And one of the issues that was also established was that she was also involved in illegal dealing in foreign currency with one of the managers at the casino. So, and the picture there that you see is a picture of Arwis, who is a Sri Lankan national. He was manager at the casino that where Lin Huixin was laundering the funds. So he was also connected to this syndicate in terms of the money laundering offense that was being prosecuted and investigated. So in terms of phone extraction, it was the phone instruction that the results of the phone instruction that directly linked Arwis to the syndicate. So you see the importance of taking a lot of strategies in your investigations. And they were charged of illegal dealing in foreign currency in addition to the money laundering. And they were later convicted and fined. So they paid a restitution. Almost all the money that was laundered was restituted. So in this slide, I present to you all the people that have been arrested, convicted, and they are serving as far as the syndicate is concerned. You see that we have several Chinese, we have several Malawians who are now in prison and who are actively involved in this syndicate that was that heavily targeted our wildlife in Malawi. So you see that rather than just targeting wildlife as a predicate crime, financial investigation led us to money laundering investigations. And this led us to discovering who else is involved, evidence on other members who are suspected to be taking part in the syndicate, but maybe just investigating the predicate crime couldn't link them to the syndicate. But Lynn, Huixin, Arwis, these were linked through financial investigations.
John,
so in terms
can
of
I
money
ask you-
laundering,
John, sorry to interrupt. Could I ask you to wrap up, please? Thank you.
yeah, I'm wrapping up. I just have 2 slides. In terms of money laundering typologies, we have preference to use remittance transactions to move illegal proceeds, use of legitimate businesses, use of third parties to receive and transfer illegal proceeds and conceal properties obtained from proceeds of crime, providing false information to meet customer identification requirements. So I also talked of the role of the media. In these investigations, the media was heavily involved, and it continues to be involved, and it is part of the committee that I earlier talked about. So in terms of challenges, what are the challenges that we face as a country? Corruption remains the major problem as far as combating wildlife crime is concerned. And also cases take time to be completed in court, and we seem not to have control. Lack of modern equipment and advanced investigation techniques. These are some of the challenges that we are still grappling with, but we are getting there as a country. Thank you very much for your attention. I hand over to you, Anne-Marie.
Thank you very much, John. That was really interesting, and it's such an important investigation. You guys have really achieved a lot in Malawi, and we're all looking to you for learnings as to the secrets of your success. So well done to everybody involved in that particular investigation. So now I think we've got Margaret's camera and microphone working now. So now I'm going to hand over to Margaret Chitundu from the National Prosecution Authority in Zambia. Margaret, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Excellent. I did do a little bit of more of a background for your introduction earlier, so I think it's best, given the time, if you take it away. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's really been interesting hearing all the previous speakers with their wealth of knowledge. Thank you very much. And now I have 15 minutes. I was asked to talk about asset recovery, and I could spend the whole day talking about the many successes we are scoring in the asset recovery space. But I'm restricted to talk about the wildlife recoveries we're making, which are not many. And that is why I will talk about why don't we have many asset recovery cases in relation to wildlife. So with the first page there, it's not whether the animals will survive, it's whether man has the will to save it. And man is you and me. Man is the public and private sector working together, because not one man can do this. We need concerted efforts. Next slide, please. So in the fight against crime, I believe the will, when we talk about the will, is man willing to fight this in relation to asset recovery. Everything rises and falls on leadership. And that is what we're enjoying in Zambia. And that is why we're making so many significant strides, because we have leaders who are resolute in fighting crime, in ensuring that crime does not pay, whether be it in wildlife trade, in asset recovery, corruption. We have political will, and we are able to do so many things. So the first point in the will to fight crime is political will. Do we have good leaders? Because I have noticed, I've been in public service for over 15 years now, and this is so true. Everything rises and falls on good leadership. Next slide, please. So why the subcommittee on financial investigations in wildlife crime? So like I earlier said, we have quite a lot of cases in relation to asset recovery. We have over 100 cases, but we have very few in relation to wildlife. And why is that? We learned, I personally learned last year that we didn't have any financial investigations in relation to wildlife crimes. So we had a lot of cases where people were being convicted for wildlife crimes. So we'd find the poacher, would find they've got ivory, they've got all sorts of wildlife illegalities, and we would take them to court and take the criminal matter, but we would not do the financial investigation. Hence, there was no assets which we could recover and make applications. So thanks to Rusi, in December 2022, I was invited by Neil, who's part of this. I wasn't part of that program, but I had met him at another training. That is why networking is so important. Connections are everything. Neil invited me to that training to just come and talk a bit about asset recovery. And I sat through there and I learned that there were no financial investigations which were being done in Zambia. So we picked it up from there. Fortunately for us, in January 2023, there was an interagency framework which was signed. And the interagency framework is bringing together 21 institutions who are talking about ensuring that crime does not pay. We're talking more about cooperation, collaboration, because we've noticed that when you work in silos, like the presentation Anne-Marie talked about earlier, where as an independent institution, you have got so much little and you think you have a lot, but when you share with other people, you find that it's such a bigger picture and it becomes easier to share and really fight crime on a bigger scale. And that is what we're doing. So we have 21 institutions, both in private and we have private sector as well. We have the Bank of Zambia, our central bank sitting with us. We have the tax component. So it's not just institutions who are public. We have brought in the private sector because we realize the private sector is really, really key, is really a key partner in ensuring that crime does not pay. So we came up with the interagency subcommittee on financial investigations, and the first meeting was held in June. And what this subcommittee does is to do financial investigations in relation to wildlife crime so that we may do asset recoveries at the end. Because what we realized that it wasn't really paying going for the small poachers, where the kingpin was left. And so we'll take away the poachers, would have 5 poachers, and we have very stiff sentences in Zambia. So very good convictions, very good sentences, but it wasn't really helping us because the people with the money were still out there. And today we have 5 convictions. They would go back with their money and employ 10 more. So it was really not helping. So what we're now doing is to do the financial investigations. In Mark's presentation, he referred to a Chinese who came with a briefcase of money to come and pay bail. So we were dealing with the small fish. When the big fish came, he came with a suitcase of money and paid for bail. So clearly, if law enforcement was aware, we should have gone for that person. We should have walked the money, who was paying, who was behind the money, so that we would have done a proper financial investigation, followed the trail, traced the money, and done an asset recovery application so that would have taken the money away from that person, therefore really effectively fighting crime. So we decided, yes, we haven't been doing the right thing, but it's not too late and we'll not give up, we'll not be defeated. So we decided to open up about 100 cases, which were potentially good cases for financial investigations. Yes, they were already convicted, they were court cases, they had died, they were buried. But we decided with the financial investigations team to look at these cases and see, can they be resuscitated? Can we find something in them? Can we do some financial investigations? So we would not go the criminal aspect because remember, they've already been convicted. Out of 4 convicted, we can't have a second bite, but we can have a second bite using the non-conviction based forfeiture. Because in Zambia, we have the non-conviction based forfeiture sitting on our statute book, sitting on the forfeiture of proceeds of crime. My Bible, I love the forfeiture of proceeds of crime. It's really far-reaching. It's really, really a good piece of legislation. So we can do non-conviction based forfeiture using those court case files. So we've started, and so far, the committee has reviewed 10 cases, which are potentially good cases. And one of the cases which we're reviewing is the Mama Congo case, which Mark talked about. And the other one is also the one relating to the man who came and paid the money with a briefcase. To try and see, can we do financial investigations? Can we follow who's behind the money? So that is why we did that. And also because why the subcommittee, I will not dwell on that. I really don't have time, so we can go to the next slide, please. So the importance of financial investigations, like I said, we need to follow the money, because really what is at the heart of crime is the money. People are willing to serve stiff sentences. They're willing. In fact, what we've learned is that in the mafia countries, in places where it's really, really rough, the people are actually better. They are safer sitting in prison. So we're really doing them a service, taking them out of harm and keeping them in prison. So what we really should be after is the money. And we can only get the money after we do financial investigations. And that is how we have this subcommittee dealing with financial investigations. Next, please.
It's your 3-minute warning, Margaret.
Oh, okay. All right. Next slide. So the importance of financial investigation, we can pass this slide. We can go to the next slide. We can go to the next slide. And then I've talked about the 100 cases which are potentially financial investigations. But I will just go and talk about a live case which we did in relation to wildlife crime and how you ensure that crime doesn't pay. So we had a case, and it happened in 2015. Where we had these people who are coming. It's a SEBO case. It's one of the cases I like in relation to wildlife crime and asset recovery. So they were coming to Zambia and they were airlifting SEBO, and we managed to confiscate the plane which they were using to airlift the SEBO. And 2 weeks ago, when I went to ZAF, I found that this helicopter, which we had seen so many years ago, is now being used for government purposes. And so this is really a powerful tool to say, we will recover the assets and we'll use them to implement, to ensure that in the dispensation of justice. And also to talk about the private-public sector engagement. We last year had a very good conviction in the asset recovery, and the person who notified us about this, who triggered the investigations, was a bank. We have one of the very famous banks in Zambia, and they noticed a very suspicious transaction, because there was 2 million which was coming from the Cayman Islands, and it was supposed to go to South Africa, but it came to Zambia. And a week before, someone opened an account, and the following week, money came into the account, and they were using a different ID. So this was triggered by a very vigilant banker, and they brought it to the attention of the investigators, and the investigations investigated it and were able to make an asset recovery application, and the court granted that application. So you can see how all of us has to play a part. All of us has a role to play, and we can use the private-public sector very powerfully to ensure that crime does not pay, and to ensure that we do not leave the criminals with incentives to continue committing crimes. So that is the asset recovery part. Hopefully we can have more time where I'll be able to share more of the cases that we're doing, and how the subcommittee is really trying to ensure that we fight crime in a big way. We've realized that you can't do it alone. You need other people to hold your hand. You need cooperation, you need coordination, you need other people, because you can't fight crime alone. So cooperation, coordination, collaboration is really key in the fight against crime. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Margaret. That's really helpful. And I'm sorry that you had to rush through your presentation because of the technical problems earlier, but I'm really glad you were able to join us. Right, our final speaker today is Geraldine Fleming. She's the task force manager at United for Wildlife, which is an initiative from the Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Geraldine's responsible for coordinating United for Wildlife's financial task force, which builds networks of private and public sector financial institutions and encourages them to work together to use their combined resources to aid financial investigation into IWT, thus hopefully preventing access to global financial systems by organized crime syndicates. She's also played an instrumental role in SAMLIT and their expert working group on some of their outputs, and has got a 30-year background in financial services. So she is very well placed to talk to us about the importance of cross-sector collaboration. So handing over to you now, Geraldine. Thank you.
Hi there, and thank you, everyone. Just to confirm, you can hear me and see my screen.
Yes, sorry, reaching for the mute button.
Okay, you can see my screen. Okay, cool.
Yes, I can.
Well, thank you all very much for having me here today. Also under time pressure, so I'm just going to set my clock quickly so that I know where I am. So as Anne-Marie said, I am, now my thing is not moving. Okay. I am the Financial Task Force Manager for United for Wildlife. And I'm going to talk to you about combating wildlife crime through public-private sector partnerships. So if I can just talk to you briefly, Anne-Marie's already covered this, what wildlife values we're talking about. Really significant values with markets for, say, rhino horn in the region of 230 to 300 million US dollars per annum, ivory 400 to 600 million US dollars per annum, and glass eels, which are trafficked out of Europe primarily and the States to China, where they are grown and fed up and re-exported as sushi. You're talking about an industry that is 2 to 3 billion US dollars per annum. So in 2016, UNEP and Interpol came together and they did a evaluation on environmental crime. And what you see here is environmental crime valued around about 75% of the value of the drugs trade. So we really are looking at something really significant. So yes, so we're talking about large scale organized crime with far-reaching implications and costs not only to our health, but our natural heritage and biodiversity, but also to our society, to our country stability and our economies, particularly in Africa, where we face loss of tourism and tax revenue streams as well. So what we're talking about is not just a bit of poaching on the side, but actually an organized criminal business with huge infrastructure, really a multinational logistics business. So what happened is in 2014, Prince William got together with a group of people, and they looked at it and they decided they wanted to create an organization that would make it possible for traffickers to transport, finance, or profit from illegal wildlife products. And so what they did is they came up with a model where they said, okay, well, firstly, what we have to do is we have to stop the product from moving. So to stop the product from moving, we need to get together the transport sector. And so they got together people from airlines, shipping lines, airports, ports, customs authorities, and kind of got everyone together to be able to share information, to be able to work together to try and make it much more difficult for traffickers to move the product. And to date, we have over 250 transport members in the private sector who are part of United for Wildlife's Transport Task Force. They then decided a couple of years later to get the finance sector together, because at some stage we know that the money or the financial flows have to enter the finance system, and to make it impossible for that to happen. And furthermore, to be able to use those financial systems to actually build a picture of what that network looked like, and to build cases of evidence by gathering evidence that they could then use to arrest, prosecute, and convict. So by getting the private sector together to work with government, to work very closely with law enforcement and industry bodies, as well as non-government organizations, and by collaborating to be able to put together our own network that targets organized crime networks. So today, United for Wildlife has over 400 members and growing very fast. We have over 62 banks, most of which are international banks, working with us, plus a lot of local banks as well, with over 100 partners. So how we work, and this just gives a little bit of context, is we have regional chapters set up in different areas. You can see by the different colors, and we already have an East Africa chapter that gets together on a monthly basis. We share information. We talk about issues that are challenging the region. We have one in Southern Africa, and then obviously we have in other parts of the world. And what we do is we gather together representatives from law enforcement, from finance sector, from transport, and from the conservation sector to share information around what IWT is looking like in those particular regions. And so I want to talk here, as I start to talk about information sharing, about the role and the very important role that NGOs actually play as well in terms of information sharing. So you have the bigger ones like a traffic or an environmental investigation agency who might publish reports and gather and collate information. RUSI has done a number of different reports. I need to put one of your pictures up there, Henry, and then obviously all the smaller ones as well, who are able to work with us much more closely and who might share tips or information about animals that they know are about to be trafficked. And we would then share that with the transport sector, who would place a high alert and be on the lookout for anybody who is looking to transport those particular animals that we're aware of. We have a partner called Focus Conservation, and Focus Conservation actually shares regular bulletins containing information around trends and typologies, as well as particular alerts on information they get. So they pull together all the information from smaller NGOs and share it with the private sector, who can then often act quite quickly, as well as law enforcement. So that gives me a little bit of a segue into SAMLIT. I just want to talk to you a little bit about this particular information sharing partnership in South Africa. The South African Anti-Money Laundering Integrated Task Force is one of many other public-private sector partnerships that we'll talk about that exist across the globe. And I think what's really quite interesting here, what SAMLIT and the South African authorities have managed to do is they have brought the private sector closer to law enforcement to work with the Financial Intelligence Center on financial investigations related to wildlife trafficking. And by the way, this structure does not apply only to wildlife trafficking. It also applies to modern slavery and human trafficking, corruption, terrorist financing. The same structure protects all those different groups. However, my focus is from a wildlife perspective. And what is working really well is we also have on the public side, we have fusion centers. So when it comes to wildlife crime, we have the Serious Organized Crime Unit working together with provincial law enforcement, the Stock Theft Unit, and the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. And by bringing those law enforcement organizations together to be able to keep information on one database and to be able to work together with the private sector, using the Financial Intelligence Center as the conduit, as the key that enables us to share information legally and safely on investigations, has worked really well. So you have really what we see as a very tight unit across the public and private sector in South Africa, working together on joint investigations. So this is what the SAMLIT structure looks like. Again, as I said, it applies to all different focus streams, but how it would work from a wildlife crime perspective is we have an expert working group that focuses particularly on the subject matter at hand, in our case, wildlife crime, and their focus is on research, understanding financial crime trends, understanding typologies, and basically sharing that information, raising awareness, not just across the industry, but also within their own organizations. And then they are tasked with producing a report, which they share publicly for further consumption. One of the best things that happen that comes out of that working group is the fact that as you work together and as the information becomes available, the information is disseminated within the banks and across the different organizations straight away. So whilst the report may take a year to come out, the information is actually absorbed through the industry much more quickly. Something that also makes them a little bit different is what they call TOGs, the Tactical Operations Groups. And those groups are actually, it actually is a joint investigation group that allows law enforcement, which would include everybody from the Serious Organized Crime Unit, the Department of Forestry and Fisheries and the Environment, the National Prosecuting Authority, Revenue Services, Customs, and the banks, and the Financial Intelligence Center as relevant to be pulled in on particular investigation, high priority crime investigations, or alternatively, where, say, for example, with succulents, we have, maybe it's a smaller crime, but we have a number of cases, which has made it a priority crime for us. So they are going to add.
Geraldine,
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. 3 minutes.
Oh my goodness. Okay. All right.
Thank
So
you.
moving on. My time is getting shorter and shorter. I will just go straight on to these. Are a number of the public-private partnerships that we work with across the group. SAMLIT from South Africa, Project Anton in Canada, and Australia, Netherlands, the Middle East has 2 as well. So there are a number of them, and we are able to help connect them across the board. So just in terms of, I'm going to skip about the importance of financial investigations, only to say that obviously looking at supply chain of wildlife trafficking, when we look at these supply chains, the further down the supply chain they go, the more complex the structure and the money flow, and the more opportunities for financial investigations and charges. So looking at an international case study, we had in 2022, October, the biggest rhino horn seizure in Singapore. And what happened was we had the South African authorities connected with the Singapore authorities on a joint investigation. They linked the rhino horn DNA back to crime scenes in South Africa. They were able to retrospectively scan the images of the accused bags to find further evidence of other rhino horn trafficking, and they brought a case to court where he was charged, the accused was charged with 2 counts of trafficking rhino horns and 1 which was a money laundering charge. Unfortunately, it was just heard, and the judge ruled that the horns themselves were not the benefits of crime, and they didn't feel that the money laundering charge was sufficiently strongly presented. The prosecution has appealed on that case, and so unfortunately that charge didn't stick. However, when we were all sad about this, what we realized is that all was not lost on this case, because there's so many learnings. It's the first time Singapore has actually brought a money laundering charge to the table, and looking at Gladys's presentation earlier, you see the court is also not familiar with hearing this kind of information. So we've seen in South Africa, the more familiar the courts get with this, the more comfortable they are, and the more the prosecutors bring it to court, the more they know what they need to bring to the potential charges. So I think what we'll see is that more and more financial charges are coming to bear. We know that these cases take a while to come to fruition, and because of that, we are I think we're just going to start seeing more and more of these cases. I just want to take you to 2 other slides. One is, this is just a slide that shows the number of papers that have been prepared on red flags, typologies around financial red flags and indicators, particularly regards wildlife trade. There are 2 recently published. SAMLIT published a second one, and the Middle East and North Africa have just published one as well. So there are a lot of resources available to you on that case. And then finally, if you are looking at case reviews, my suggestion is to have a look at the back of the SAMLIT report, the most recent one, where they take you through a process flow and a way to analyze these cases, so that you can actually go through past cases yourself and analyze them with a view to producing some kind of output that can be shared more broadly. I think, Anne-Marie, given the time, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
I know there's a lot, but
I'm so sorry to cut you short. We've just had a few
Okay.
technical issues earlier in the program. So I appreciate
No
you
problem.
pulling on your sword, and also what great resources. That's amazing. I just want to very quickly wrap up by basically saying more thank yous. First of all, to the speakers, we couldn't have done today without you. Her Worship Gladys Kamasanyu, Margaret Chitundu, Mark Williams, John Minofu, Geraldine Fleming, and Neil Bennett. And also our partners to the wider project, which include the EIA, the Environmental Investigation Agency, who unfortunately couldn't join us today due to conflicts, Refinitiv, the Roy Cat Trust, Traffic, United for Wildlife, Wild Aid, and Wildlife Crime Prevention, as well as in-country government partners. Finally, our donor is obviously due thanks for the funding to make this happen, which is the UK government through the fund we all know called the IWT Challenge Fund, which has done so much for strengthening wildlife enforcement and justice across the continent. Finally, to you guys, the participants as well, we can't do this workshop without you guys turning up. So thank you very much for leaning into the problem. Whichever sector you come from, be it public, private, or civil society, it's really important that we work together and learn from each other, from our mistakes as well as our successes. And there are plenty of each to celebrate. So thank you very much for your attendance and enthusiasm today, and goodbye.